Good to go.
Hi everyone, welcome to the fourth masterclass from Basto for 2018. Welcome. It'd be great if you could introduce yourselves in the back channel that we have going tonight. So tonight we are talking about oral language and vocabulary, and actually the topic for tonight came out of as a result of the feedback that we received after the third masterclass, which was on feedback. We had a few people requesting this topic, so that's why we have responded to the feedback. We've modelled best practice, responded to the feedback, and that's what we'll be talking about tonight. So I'm very happy to be presenting again tonight and sharing this journey with you. So my name is Narissa Leung. I'm an education consultant in Victoria. I'm currently facilitating 4 intakes of Basto's Leading Literacy program, and I'm also facilitating a couple of intakes of the Literacy Data Assessment Practice course, affectionately known as the LDAP. And I will just say to you that keep an eye out for the openings and the applications for LDAP and Leading Literacy for next year, because they'll be going up on the Basto website soon. And I happen to know they're both really good courses. So that's me. Tonight, our agenda is that we're going to have a bit of a chat about oral language. We'll of course look at the research. It would not be a professional development session in Victoria if we didn't refer to Hattie, so we'll definitely be doing that at the start. Talking a little bit about teacher talk and our role in the classroom in discussions. And then we're looking at turning the lens onto the students and how we can be developing more effective and more high impact talk between our students. And then finally, just for a little snippet at the end, we're going to be discussing some vocabulary, unpacking a bit of the research and talking a little bit about some robust vocab instruction. We won't have enough time to delve really deeply into the vocabulary, sorry. However, you can join Leading Literacy or LDAP to learn more about it. So there's a little taste test for you. So if you've joined the masterclass series before, you'll be familiar with the format. It can be a long time, 2 hours. So break it up because, as Beverly Derewinker says here, it's primarily through talk that learning occurs. So tonight we have a platform that enables us to have a back channel, which is a discussion channel that happens at the same time as the presentation. And this is how we can deepen our understanding. We don't have the capacity to have that face-to-face connection, but we do have the capacity to have that chat back channel, which I think is a great facility to have. And it means that Basto can provide professional learning to every little nook and cranny in the state. And that's why I'm really pleased to be involved in this. So I definitely encourage you to join in on the back channel. If you see this little chat symbol, that means that I'm encouraging you to share your thoughts on the back channel. And I would love it if you've got any resources, if you've participated in something like this, if you've engaged with some activities with your students that have been effective, share all of that in the chat to help us all learn more about these topics that we're discussing tonight. Special hello to Jodie Woodward. I see you've logged in. Good work. So hopefully you've got the access, you've got the link to the Padlet. It's there, padlet.com, and you can just write that down. It also came out to you in the email. Now, in the email, you will have received a package or a Word document with resources that we're going to look at tonight. So I encourage you to have that handy with you because I want you to do some reflecting throughout the night. It's not, you'll get more out of it if you stop and do some reflection. And if you're fortunate enough to have other people sitting next to you, then you can have the discussion with them as well. Okay, so let's look at our understanding goals for the night. So the first one is that you will develop an understanding of the research behind oral language and vocabulary instruction in the classroom. The second part, we're going to turn more from the research into the practice. What are the practical things that we can do? So we know the research says this, what can we do in our classrooms? So the key elements of effective teaching practices around oral language and vocabulary. And again, it's only a tasting plate tonight. So I'm hoping my secret agenda is to get you really interested in this so you'll then go and do some further research and take up some of the resources and spend your holidays reading books. And then the final understanding goal for tonight is that you'll have a deeper knowledge of the range of supporting resources. And in Victorian education at the moment, we are not short on resources. We're so fortunate to have the incredible resources that are being produced at the moment. So that's the third understanding goal for tonight. Our success criteria, I will pull these up again at the end of the night so you can check against the criteria. So I'd like you to be able to describe what research says about oral language and vocabulary instruction, explain the key elements of rich and robust oral language and vocabulary instruction, reflect on your current instruction and teaching practices in these areas, and to list the range of resources available for these. So that's our success criteria. Now, before we go launching into the research about oral language, it's important for us to conduct a little stock take on our current knowledge of the topic. So what I'd like you to do is to reflect on these 3 questions that I've put here. So the first one, how do you currently plan for oral language instruction in your classroom? And maybe this actually isn't something that is planned for at the moment, and that is totally fine. That's exactly what tonight is about. It's about, I guess for me, raising the profile of oral language. I kind of view oral language as the poor cousin in the literacy suite. So really tonight, that's what I want to do, is raise the profile of oral language. How do you assess your students' progress in speaking and listening? And how do you currently plan for and deliver vocabulary instruction in your classroom? So I'm going to start the timer for 3 minutes. If you turn to your resource pack, activity 1, you can jot your answers down in there. And I'd also love you to share some of your responses in the chat. So I'm going to stop speaking so you can do some reflecting. Term 4.
It is term 4, that's exactly right. And then worked out they can get it later.
Yeah, which a lot of them have been.
Yeah.
You see how many people have viewed the other ones?
Okay.
It's huge, yeah. It's more than 3,000 people have viewed the formative assessment one.
Yeah. So I'd say I wouldn't get too excited about that. I think getting on 100 each time would be 2,000.
Yeah. Also, people don't value oral language. They think everyone can do it.
Which is a shame. It's kind of neat.
Yeah. They need to be in here so they learn that. Is that Vera Lavis? I'm going to tell her she's to do 10 push-ups because she was late. Okay, thanks everyone. Thank you for sharing your reflections in the chat as well. Vera, I see that you were late, so you'll just have to do 10 push-ups before you leave tonight. But otherwise, thank you everyone for sharing your responses. That's terrific. Okay, so let's have a look at the research now on oral language. If you attended the last masterclass session, you will remember this graphic that I showed at the start. And this is Hattie's updated list of factors with the effect size. So hopefully everyone's familiar with the idea of effect size and high impact, or Hattie's research. So last time we looked at feedback, and we saw that feedback had a 0.7 effect size, which is quite significant. But hovering up above feedback is this one, classroom discussion, 0.82. And I find this absolutely fascinating because I don't think we talk about this very often. Or, we hear about feedback all of the time. We hear about learning intentions, success criteria, particularly when we're talking about Hattie's research. But there's not a whole lot of talk going on around classroom discussion. And actually, the effect size is higher than feedback. So I discovered this when I was looking through the High Impact Teaching Strategies document down underneath, I think it was collaborative learning. Buried right down the bottom was this classroom discussion with the effect size of 0.82. So let's have a look at that. So you can see here, Edwards, Groves, Bull and Anstey have kind of discussed two types of classroom talk. And I see some people have been talking about both of these types of talk in their chat responses. So there's presentational talk, and sometimes when we're thinking about speaking and listening in our classroom, we talk about assessment of this. We say, yes, we get our students to get up and do a presentation or do a talk at the end of a unit of work. So that's only one part of talk. So that's presentation talk. You can see that on the left there. It's more focused on content and audience. It's more of performance where information is presented. So we want to turn our attention tonight more towards the other side, the exploratory talk. So exploratory talk, this is used to explore meaning, hence the name, exploratory talk. It's the context in which meaning is developed. And I really like the last one. It's students talking their way into meaning. So back when Beverly Derewenka said about that we deepen our understanding through talk, that's what we're talking about when we're discussing this exploratory talk. It encourages the exploration of ideas rather than the presentation of certainties. So whereas presentation, we know exactly what we are going to discuss. Exploratory talk, we're really just kind of developing our ideas as we're discussing this with someone else. So the research in oral language instruction is similar to that in feedback. And we saw last time that John Hattie said that even though feedback has a really high effect size, how it was implemented had a really high variance. So not all instruction had that high effect size. So exploratory talk kind of has the same, it's very similar to that in that there's widespread agreement that discussion is vital to comprehension and critical thinking. However, the implementation is less than robust. So how we actually go about developing this in our classrooms could do with a bit of work. I think that's what they're saying here. So let's have a look at what the curriculum, the Victorian curriculum, is asking us to do in regards to speaking and listening. So I'm just going to show a couple. I understand there's a whole lot of text in these slides, and the people who tell you there's too much text on slides are absolutely right about this. I understand that, sorry. We're looking at the speaking and listening mode here towards foundation, the literacy strand, and you can see here interacting with others from level A to level D. So in level A, we're responding to various types of communication. So we're probably in the exploratory talk there, and we're reacting to others sharing and delivering a presentation. So probably more the presentational talk. Right through to level D, where we're listening and responding to communication in classroom situations, again exploratory, and delivering short oral presentations about an object, presentation. Then we turn our attention to the literature strand. So there's the literacy strand and the literature strand, and this is where the talk helps us to deepen our understanding of text and to develop our comprehension of what it is that we're reading and looking at. So here in level A, they will respond to images and sounds, respond to text, and right through to level D, where they'll identify favourite texts and characters and express likes or dislikes. If we look at the EAL continuum, the current one that we have, I've only selected one of these because obviously there are a few. So if we're looking just at upper primary, I've highlighted a couple of key points. Negotiate simple transactions, ask and answer basic questions, initiate and manage interaction appropriately, and then down the bottom, employ basic strategies to sustain and enhance communication in English. And then finally, if we look at foundation to level 6, so in the literacy strand, listen to and respond orally to texts and to the communication of others, deliver short oral presentations. Right through to level 6, which is quite comprehensive. This isn't something that we can kind of just pull out at report writing time and go, oh, what were we supposed to do again? Participate in and contribute to discussions, clarifying, interrogating, developing and supporting arguments, sharing and evaluating information. There's a whole lot of work that's going on here. So this is, then down the bottom, participate in formal and informal debates and plan, rehearse and deliver presentations. So we're not just talking about standing up at the end of a unit and giving a speech to the class. Talk in class needs to be much, much broader than that, particularly in level 6 there. And then when we come to look at the literature strand, in Foundation, our students are required to respond to texts, identify favourite stories, share feelings and thoughts about events and characters in text. So right from Foundation, we're talking about early book club discussions, where sometimes we think that our students aren't ready for that and we kind of wait until the middle to senior years. Our students right down in Foundation need to be having those discussions. And right through to level 6 there, make connections between own experiences and those of characters and events, and really having that rich discussion around text. So there's a whole lot in the Victorian curriculum, and as I said before, I really think the oral language has been the poor cousin. This is kind of the one that we get to report writing time, we think, haven't actually taught a whole lot of that, so we'll just have to go down the middle and give everyone a C. Hopefully, after tonight, you'll have a bit more of an idea about what does it actually look like, what are the things that I can do to support more high impact, that 0.8 to effect size classroom discussion that Hattie was talking about. So we're going to watch a short clip of Carmen Cravola now, and she's discussing talk practice in classrooms. And while you're watching this video, I want you to think about these 4 questions, these 4 prompts that I've put here for you. So the first one is, what was confirmed for you? So what are things that Carmen is saying are confirming beliefs that you already have? Anything that is new for you? What's been your takeaway from what she said? And what are you thinking about now? So we're just going to watch this short clip, and then I encourage you after it, I'm going to give you 2 to 3 minutes afterwards to share some of your thinking in the chat there. So let's have a watch.
Well, we go back and think about that work of John Hattie in the meta-analysis Visible Learning for Teachers, or Visible Learning. Both of those texts that Hattie has presented to us solid evidence about the importance of the teacher, solid evidence about the importance of instructional language. So if we went out from that most recent meta-analyses of the data and the literature, we know that we have that core that's something we're doing all day, every day, 2/3 of the time is the teacher talking. So in thinking about that, we need to be conscious of now raising the level of talk of the teacher, not increasing it, but raising the effectiveness of it, so that, in fact, it raises the effectiveness and powerfulness of the talk of the student. So we're going to be improving both the instructional language and the expressive or productive language of the student. There's a couple of things that I want to just highlight that are so regularly a part of our instructional language, which is actually debilitating the ability of the students to improve their language. One of the things is the wait time. It's such a simple thing. Teachers will always agree that wait time or pause time is important. But a quick analysis of the data and the literature shows that the mean wait time in a classroom is 2 seconds. 2 seconds from the first prompt. So we are very good at getting the right answer into the air as teachers. Courtney Kasdan, in her work Classroom Discourse, talks about the fact that teachers are expert at getting the right answer into the air. And most teachers know exactly what I mean when I say that to them. It means that we're always about that content knowledge. We're always about faster, quicker, and we're wanting to get to that end point. The skill in being an articulate teacher who allows students that time to explore and their own knowledge and their own understanding and their own reflections is now the teacher who actually has more pause time. Dr. John Hattie in his work will tell us that, we need to reduce the amount of teacher talk in the classrooms. Well, I believe that if we work on the quality of the teacher talk, it by itself starts to reduce it. So if I increase my pause time, I reduce my talking time and I increase the talking time of the student. When you increase your pause time by even 1 second, that's incredibly powerful, because if we increase the length of the response of the students, what do we do to the teacher talk? We actually reduce the amount of talk that the teacher does. Another little clue there is the amount of times that a teacher repeats the answers of a student. So we ask a question in the class, and every time the student says something, the teacher parrots back exactly what the student said. So we think we're building listeners in our classroom, but our actions actually teach the students how not to listen. So a very quick way to reduce the amount of teacher talk in the classroom again is to stop repeating everything that the students say. It's much more powerful to hand it back to the students and say, did you hear what he said? What did he say?
To do a bit of reflection there, Carmen has some really great points in there. I think that's the type of clip that you could watch probably 4 or 5 times and always get something new out of it. So I'd love you to share your ideas in the chat here. What was confirmed for you? What was new? What's your main takeaway? And what are you thinking about now as a result of some of those ideas that Carmen's given us? And I'll put 2 minutes on the clock for you. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. I've also just would like to apologise for not including a secondary example in the curriculum. I do have secondary examples throughout, but I forgot to put that in there at the start. Okay, so I can see that wait time has been something that has come up for a few people, which I'm really pleased to see. And just that general reminder that we love to talk as teachers, and I am certainly guilty of that. Look at me tonight, standing here talking for 2 hours. Teacher's dream. So let's have a look at the role of the teacher. So as Carmen alluded to when she referenced Hattie's work in this area, there's been heaps of research that basically has reminded us that, yes, us teachers do talk too much. What a surprise. there was also a whole lot of research done about looking at, well, what is the teacher talk? What's the teacher spending their time talking about? And this wasn't just done in Australia, it was done across the world. And a common pattern emerged in that teacher talk, and that was this. It was the IRE sequence, or sometimes it's referred to as the IRF. So the I is initiate. So the teacher asks a question to the student. So generally we're talking about the teacher standing at the front with the class seated in front of them. The teacher asks a question. Can someone tell us this? Does anyone remember this? Who can tell me this? The students usually put their hand up and bid to be the person that gets to answer the question. So that's the respond part. And then the teacher evaluates their response. So can anyone tell us who said this in the book? Student puts their hand up and yes, Isaac, who was it? And then the teacher says, good, that's right, it was such and such. So this is the common pattern that was seen across numerous countries. So it's not just us here in Victoria. And it is, when you do look at your own class and reflect back on it, it's absolutely accurate. So the IRE, if it's referred to as an IRF, it is feedback. So initiate, respond, feedback. So basically what this means, if you're looking at that, initiate, respond, evaluate, it means that 2 out of the 3 turns are taken up by teacher voice. So the teacher is speaking twice as much as the students if this pattern is the only pattern that is used in the classroom. And it's not uncommon for that to be the case. So that's one of the things that we can certainly adjust to make sure that we're not dominating the class by only using this IRE response system. So the research says that this is not, it's not to say that you should never ever do this. It's a problem if this is the only pattern that's being implemented in the classroom. So initiate, respond, evaluate, IRE, it's the default option that teachers return to in times of stress. IREs can encourage monologic teacher talk, which is effectively what I'm doing tonight, that severely limits student or learner talk. It in turn affects the amount and quality of learning by students. So you know yourselves when you think, oh my goodness, I've got so much content, we've just got to get through to the really important part. That's when we're kind of pushed into this IRE area. And this is kind of reflective of that pattern that Carmen referred to in her video where she said that we're good at getting the answer into the air. So, when we're under stress and we really need to move on, we might pick on 1 or 2 students to say, do you know the answer? No, do you? And then we'll eventually go to the student who we know will more than likely have the answer that we already have stored in our head so that we can all move on. So it basically, if we only engage in the IRE pattern, it promotes a tendency for kind of the loudest voices in the class or the fastest hands in the class to be valued more. And so that's something that we want to turn away from so that we're encouraging all of the students to have more talk in the class. So I'll take you back to this slide, which has far too much text on it. If you joined in the first masterclass series on formative assessment, I shared this research. It says an average teacher asks 400 questions each day, about 70,000 questions each year, or 2 to 3 million questions over a teaching career. That means teachers spend a third of their time asking questions, yet most of the questions that we pose are answered in less than a second. And basically that's the time that we're willing to wait before either accepting an answer, calling on someone else, or answering the question ourselves. So I raised this in the formative assessment masterclass, and I think it's something that we just need to keep being reminded of. There was another research done that stated that up to 90% of teacher utterances in the classroom were questions, and 80% of those were used to elicit simple recall. So you might be a good time to go back to that formative assessment masterclass and listen back to the questioning to work out ways that we can improve our questioning so that we aren't just using all of our questioning kind of as behaviour management or simple recall. So I want you to have a think about here your current talk patterns. And sometimes you won't be aware of your talk patterns unless you record yourself, even for 10 minutes. I highly recommend just on your own phone, use the audio recorder to record your 10-minute mini lesson to see what is the talk pattern that I'm engaging in, what are the questions that I'm asking, and who's dominating the conversation. And you'll be really surprised. I know I really was. So here, look at this quote. Through talk patterns, teachers demonstrate and discover what they expect and value, just as students discover and demonstrate what counts in terms of learning, knowledge, and knowing. So with your current talk patterns, what are you demonstrating to the students that you value? So do you value loud and fast? Do you value only correct? Do what type of knowledge is important? Is it simple recall? Is it that kind of deep thinking knowledge? And how are you demonstrating that through the discussions that you're leading in your classroom? So really thinking about what do your current talk patterns say about what you expect or what you value in the classroom? And looking at a lot of the research on this, when teachers start to change away from using that IRE pattern, it is difficult to change at first because our students have been classically conditioned into the hand up kind of competitive bidding. So it does take some unlearning, I guess you call it, for our students and for ourselves so that we're not just solely engaging in that IRE. So then thinking about, well, if that's your talk pattern, what does that say about what you demonstrate about the importance of listening as well? So I was really fascinated by what Carmen said about how we always repeat back to the students, because I know I used to do that a lot and I thought I was being really helpful. And I hadn't thought about it in terms of, oh yeah, I'm actually sending a message to the students to say, well, no one needs to listen to that person contributing because I'm going to parrot it back anyway. So I hadn't actually thought of it in those terms. It made me think about this, on the left-hand side, we've got that teacher, the dialogue is really the teacher and with one student in the class. And we're encouraging the students to look forward to the teacher when the person who is actually giving the answer might be sitting next to us or behind us. So how are we promoting those, the listening skills that are required in the curriculum when we're only engaging in that everyone sits and looks at the teacher for the discussion? So we want to aim to have more of a balance. I liked what Carmen said about it's not necessarily removing the teacher talk, but it's improving the quality of it when we do talk. But we need to have more of a balance between the teachers and the students contributing. So if we do have a look back at the curriculum, I've just pulled out level 3 here to see the listening component of it. Listen to and contribute to conversations and discussions, and then down the bottom, use interaction skills, including active listening. Well, what does that mean? So this is really, we're going to talk about this tonight, about that gradual release of responsibility. We need to explicitly teach these interaction skills and this active listening that they're talking about in the curriculum. I think speaking and listening, we kind of think, well, most people can do it when they're born, so it's not something we have to spend a lot of time on. Hopefully tonight, I'm going to change your mind on that. So basically, if we're not engaging in that IRE for every classroom discussion, then what are the alternatives? So let's have a look at some. Even better if, EBI. Here's an example from one of the Primary English Teachers Association of Australia publications. So the teacher says, and what's this one? What's this next one? Let's all think about this for a moment. And then that 3 is 3 seconds of wait time. Okay, now turn and talk to your elbow partner and share what you've been thinking. And then the students turn and talk. Elbow partner, that's if you're sitting on the floor or at the tables, it's whoever's sitting next to you, obviously elbows to elbows. And then who can explain what they know about this one? I like how the teacher actually changed their question. That first one, what's this next one? That would have had the danger of heading into an IRE sequence. Whereas who can explain what they know about this? It's a more open-ended question. So then the student says it's a boat. And rather than providing the evaluation here, well done, Maddie, it's a boat, the teacher has said, say some more about that, Maddie. What else do you know about this boat? So they've actually extended it and asked for more information rather than just giving the evaluation and moving on. So this becomes initiate, respond, extend instead of initiate, respond, evaluate. And that's what we need to, this is the first little tweak that we can make to our teacher practice to improve the quality of the talk in the classroom. So that we're saying to our students, I don't actually have all of the answers in my head. We're going to construct this knowledge and this comprehension together. And this here means that the students are valued more as thinkers, and they are holders of the knowledge as well. I'm not the one at the front who holds all of the knowledge and you have to guess what's in my head. It also encourages students to be more active. So we could passively sit there and wait until someone else, threw out the correct answer. Or in this sense, Maddie has had to think a lot more deeply than just giving a surface level answer. Oh yeah, it's a boat, done. So initiate, respond, extend. So try this as your kind of first tweak to the teacher talk that's happening in your classroom. If you would like some more support in how you can change that, the pattern, they call it talk moves or the moves. So the first move is the teacher initiating, the second move is the student responding, and then the third move is the teacher extending. Then this publication from the Primary English Teachers Association of Australia, Becoming a Meaning Maker, has some really good resources in there. They've got a table in there with some other extending prompts that you might use. Now, as a teacher, I myself would pull out a few of these and I would put them on an anchor chart at the back of the room just to prompt me to be making sure that I'm using some of these prompts. So can you say more about that? What else can you add? What makes you say that? Can you dig a bit deeper? Why do you think that? Those types of things. I would pull a couple of those out, stick it on an anchor chart for me, and just so that I can remember when I'm speaking, got to be careful, I'm heading into IRE territory. How can I change that last E to make it an extend, more an effective response? So I hope that makes a bit of sense. So why is it so important to change this IRE pattern? I think we've kind of worked this out ourselves anyway. Without dialogue, children do not learn language. Now, this is incredibly significant for our EAL students. I think about the time when if you've ever tried to learn a second language. So in high school, I was learning French. I could listen to the teacher using all of her amazing and, romantic, beautiful sounding French words all day. It wasn't going to improve my capacity to speak and converse in the language until I was forced into a position where I had to actually roll the words around inside my own mouth and test them out. That helped me to build my language skills in French. So if you think about yourself as a second language learner, you need to experience these words yourself. So without the dialogue, without you practicing with another person, we don't learn language. And also if you think about that, you need to think about how intimidating it can be to try that language. I know when I was learning French, I was so embarrassed. What if I said things wrong? What if I messed up the pronunciation or the words? So that goes back to creating that really safe learning culture where it's okay to just try things out and it's not necessarily going to be perfect when you roll it out the first time. So I think this is why it's really important. So without dialogue, now let's go and have a look at dialogue. This is what I do on my weekends, looking up Google, checking, the history of words. This is what excites me. So dialogue, a conversation between two or more people. So dialogue isn't the teacher at the front of the room doing all of the talking. So dialogue is a conversation between two people. So that would imply that it's forwards and backwards between those two people. Okay, let's go one step further. All of you history buffs, let's look at the origin. I was fascinated by this. So the word dialogue, you see right down the bottom there, from dia, which means through, or it also means across, and ligin, speak. So through speak. Dialogue means through speak. I did get a little bit distracted when I was looking this up and started thinking, dia? I didn't know that meant through or across. What other words do I know that start with dia? Here we go. Dialect, diameter, diagnosis. You guys can probably think of some more. And yes, I'm going to take it there. Diarrhea. Wow, had no idea. So just if you are ever stuck in a foreign country in a hotel room feeling ill and you need to email your parents to say that you've got this terrible illness, this is how you spell it. Dia, which means through. And then the last part is actually rain, which means to flow, so flow through. I thought it was through Anyway, we'll move on. I do think this helps though, because this goes to the vocab that I'm going to talk about later. Knowing that dire is through, I now know and will always know how to spell the first half of that word, because I used to spell it with an O, but now I understand that dire means through. And now you'll all understand it too. And I hope that comes up at a trivia night one night and you'll all thank me. All right, so what is the alternative to traditional monologic talk? So monologic, mono, what's that word mean? We know some other words that start with mono. Dialogic talk is talk with substance, okay? There's another, people also refer to it as accountable talk. In accountable talk, participants listen carefully to one another, build on each other's ideas, ask each other questions aimed at clarifying or expanding a proposition. Okay, so we're going to talk more about dialogic talk or accountable talk or substantive talk next. The Literacy Teaching Toolkit, our beloved Literacy Teaching Toolkit, has a whole lot of resources on this, and I'm just going to show you now where to find those. So if you head to the Literacy Teaching Toolkit, not now because you won't be able to see me, speaking and listening, teaching practices. So in here, this is where you're going to find a whole list of resources to do with this type of thing. So you can see there, accountable talk, teacher talk, extended talk, dialogic talk. Read this, heaps of resources on here, and it will point you to more research in the area. This is your job for the holidays, and you'll get really excited about it when you start diving in there and having a little look. So what are the benefits of dialogic talk, this idea of dialogic talk? The first one is that there's more talk about talk by teachers and students. So rather than kind of assuming that everyone understands talk and how to go about it and what the pragmatics are and what's acceptable and what's not, we actually will stop and reflect on the talk that we're engaging in the classroom. We have a shift away from hands up competitive bidding and more turn and talk in-depth discussion. Teachers give more thinking time to their students. This is really hard for us because we've got so much to teach, we've got to move on. But we just have to keep remembering what's effective practice, and more wait time is effective practice. So we have a replacement of our old IREs with more and better quality questioning from teachers to students, more open questions. Questioning is something we can work on for our whole life, I think. I found this really critical. A greater involvement of less able students and the quiet students due to more inclusive climate of their classrooms. So if you think about, go put yourself back into your own second language learning experience, you're hardly about to put your hand up and be the person that answers in front of the whole rest of the class. If you do that elbow turn and talk, you're much more likely to actually give the language a go and to engage in that type of discussion than you are that one-on-one with the teacher in front of the rest of the students. And the final one, an increase due to a greater emphasis on talk in the reading and writing abilities of all students, especially the less able students. Very interesting. That comes from Alexander, the research, and they did the 5 Nations study. That might be something that you look at in your own time. I'm not going to go through that one tonight. So what can you do as a teacher? I think you've probably already come up with some ideas while you've been listening to this. My suggestions for you, you need to plan for and ask authentic questions. So when you're doing your planner about what am I going to talk about in my mini lesson, that's right there where you are going to be thinking, right, what are the questions that I'm going to be asking? Because we can't rely on ourselves to have the ability to develop these open-ended questions right on the spot. So having those prompts on the wall for us will also help, but I think you need to explicitly plan for some of these in your planning. Get into the habit of using those further questions and not just accepting the first answer, asking other people to add on or to contribute as well. Obviously, we're going to start employing some wait time. This idea of vacating the floor. Now, this doesn't mean that you get up and just totally leave the dance floor altogether. This just means that there's a balance. so that you are not the one up the front the whole entire time doing all of the talk. It means that you can step to the side and allow the students to have some floor time themselves. As in, when I'm saying floor time, I'm meaning some time to engage in discussion themselves. This is critical. We have to create a classroom climate that welcomes thinking aloud, and that I've called it unpolished thoughts. It kind of goes back to what we mentioned earlier, that exploratory talk is about ideas rather than the presentation of certainties. So when we're contributing unpolished thoughts, if we're talking about a text, then we're putting our thoughts forward and they're not fully formed. They might be something that we're still thinking about. And so we need to create that classroom climate where that's absolutely okay and that's really celebrated, because we're trying to contribute to everyone's understanding and to develop more comprehension. We need to get better at accepting responses without always evaluating them. I mean, I'm not saying don't evaluate them ever, but we have to try and step away from that constant IRE pattern. We need to expect our students to start asking questions and expect them to start making statements rather than kind of being passive receivers of waiting for you to be the one that asks a question. And then the final one, that you as a teacher need to model first and then expect your students to listen. And they will know that you're listening because you're building on their responses. And we want our students to build on other students' responses. So really building the listening skills and the expectation of listening in our class. And that might be about changing our responses from IRE all of the time. Wow, just given you so much information. So time to have a bit of reflection. So I want you to open up your resource pack and head to activity 2, reflecting on your teacher talk. Now, this would be so much more effective if you had a little video of yourself next to you so you could watch it back to say, well, how did I go today? And then you could start to really think about what are the patterns of talk in your class. But I know you'll all do that in the next 2 weeks in between writing reports. So that's good. So if you head over to the activity 2 and just have a reflection about, think about how's your thinking shaping up. And I'd love you to share your triangle response in the chat there. So what's at the top of your head? And I'm going to give you 3 minutes to engage in that reflection. Okay.
Just give me a sec, Narissa.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for that, everyone. Sorry, I just blipped out for a minute there. I am back now, though, so good news. So thank you for sharing your suggestions in the chat there. Poor old Jody had a bit of an electronic stutter, so I'm sure you'll work that out, Jody. I did have a question in there about calling on different students, and the literature absolutely suggests that this is a good idea. And so they suggest that you have kind of paddle pop sticks at the front of the class with different students' names on, and you can pull those out to ask those students to contribute. What that does is it helps the students to realise that they too that everyone is accountable and everyone needs to engage in the thinking behind the question, rather than kind of sitting back and thinking it's okay because Paige always answers, so I'll just wait till she gives the answer and then we're all off the hook. So that is something that is encouraged in the literature. So I'd love to hear about if you give it a go and see how that works in your class. As some people have pointed out, turn and talk, that is absolutely incredible formative assessment. So that is not your time to check emails. That is your time to be circulating around the room, listening to the talk that is going on between the pairs. And after they've engaged in the turn and talk, then you could, rather than saying, if I've turned and talked and I've been talking to Teresa, rather than say the teacher asking me what I've said, they might say, can you share what Teresa had to say to you? So again, lifting the accountability on the listening skills. And so you might say that at the start. After this turn and talk, I'm going to ask some people to report back what their partner had to say in the discussion. So it really turns the dial up on the listening. So just some suggestions there. Okay. We're now going to turn our attention towards the student talk. So we're looking after ourselves. We've got a few things that we need to work on, a bit of homework for ourselves. Let's have a look at what the students can be doing. So why classroom talk is critical to teaching and learning. And we've looked at that idea of presentational talk versus exploratory talk. We're going into that exploratory talk part here. So talk can reveal understandings and misunderstandings. And this is really highlighted when we're walking around listening to that turn and talk happening in the classroom. That's when we've got our extendy ears on and we're listening to see what are the understandings currently. It pushes students in thoughts and assists them to clarify their thinking. So especially when we do a turn and talk, or you might do a think pair square, which is when you have think pair, which is when you join to the person next to you, and then you join two pairs together. So we're helping to deepen our understanding about whatever the topic is that we're discussing. It can build confidence, it engages students in more substantive classroom discussion, and it lifts intellectual dialogue. And sometimes you'll say that we have a poverty of dialogue in our class, maybe from a low socioeconomic background, your students, or you have a high EAL contingent, and you'll say, oh, our students aren't articulate. We need to provide them with the opportunity to develop that dialogue, and they're not going to do it just by listening to us waffling on all of the time. It supports robust learning by boosting memory. It promotes deeper reasoning and critical literacy. So when we start looking at our NAPLAN data and we're starting to say, wow, we're not shifting our students in the years 5, 7 and 9, that's because the complexity of the text is starting to get harder and harder. So we need to adapt our teaching practices to help our students engage with that higher complexity of text as they go through. So it's not just about decoding, it's about really focusing on the comprehension. And how do we do that? Through these substantive conversations, this dialogic teaching, or this accountable talk. There's so many different terms for it. It promotes deeper reasoning, critical literacies. It scaffolds language development. We talked about that. It nourishes the development of social skills. This is really important, again, for our EAL students and for our low socioeconomic students who might not have the role modelling at home and need that explicit instruction into the development of social skills and the language for different social outings, I guess. And if you've ever engaged in that kind of professional learning around understanding poverty, the Ruby Payne work, you'll really get this and know the students that this applies to. And this final one, which is really critical and needs to be, kind of on the forward, it's the moment where the curriculum meets the students. So we're not steamrolling over the top of the students with the curriculum, we're actually meeting the curriculum, and the students are really actually engaging with it when we're providing them with the time to engage in that discussion, that effective, that 0.82 discussion that John Hattie is talking about. So when we're talking about talk, I need to stop saying talk. When we are discussing talk and EAL students, this resource, Talking the Talk, again, it's from the Primary English Teachers Association book. Academic English is no one's mother tongue. I love that because it's so true. Making support to learn academic English in disciplines such as science, history and geography is important for all students. For EAL students, such support is essential. So we do need to remember that although we think, most people can speak and most people can listen, academic English, that's no one's mother tongue. So we need to engage in explicit instruction for all of our students to enable them to engage with that. So let's just get our kids to talk more. No. Just because students are talking more doesn't mean that it automatically results in deeper learning. And that's the deeper learning that Hattie was talking about. There are some quality indicators related to solid discussion. Students need to know the rules of discussion, both in small groups and as a whole class, as well as the procedures for doing both. This goes back to what I said about the social skills. So here, roll in the gradual release of responsibility, absolutely applicable to classroom talk. So I'm hoping this isn't the first time that you've seen this. If it is, welcome. This model was originally developed for teaching reading, the gradual release of responsibility. And the idea is that at the start, the teacher holds most of the responsibility for the work. So you can see there, focused instruction. So it's the teacher modelling. It's the I do it. And then we're slowly stepping through the we do it, the you do it together, and then the you do it alone. Unfortunately, for so much oral language and speaking learning instruction in our classroom, we kind of go straight to the you do it alone because we make assumptions that our students come equipped with those skills. So we've got to remember that all good teaching and learning revolves around this gradual release of responsibility. If you are interested in more information about the gradual release of responsibility, you want to read the research behind it, there's a book called Better Learning Through Structured Teaching. And I think I have this at the end. And I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs about this gradual release of responsibility. So it says, the gradual release may occur over a day, a week, a month, or a year. Some people try and squash it all into every single lesson, but you've heard it straight from the book now. The gradual release of responsibility framework, originally developed for reading instruction, reflects the intersection of several theories. So it's Piaget, Vygotsky, Bandura, Wood, Bruner, and Ross. We're not suggesting that every lesson must always start with focused instruction before progressing to guided instruction, then to collaborative learning, and finally to independent tasks. What is important and necessary for deep learning is that students experience all 4 phases of learning when encountering new content. So we have to think about when we're asking our students to engage in these rich discussions. So lit circles is a really good example. We can't expect our students to dive in and have this really deep and robust discussion without us scaffolding their learning. So we need to really think about that gradual release of responsibility for our speaking and listening instruction. What are some things that we can do with our students? I've put a link at the top here to some anchor charts that you might be able to use in your classroom. This one, bit.ly/active listening. So we've got our anchor chart. We've explicitly talked about this with our students. What are the types of things that you would see people doing if they're engaging in active listening? Because we tell our students to listen all the time, but have we actually unpacked what does that mean? What does that look like? We assume that our students know it means that you're looking at the speaker, that you're nodding your head, you might even be leaning forward. But have we actually explicitly stated that with the students? Have we gone through that gradual release of responsibility with them? So having an anchor chart is just a fancy word for a poster. Having this in your room is good to remind students about what active listening actually is. After they've engaged in the discussion, you might get them to reflect on their ability to engage in these. So let's have a look at our anchor chart for active listening. Did you have your eyes on the speaker? Were you nodding your head? So that's that talk about talk. Okay, so if you visit that website, the bit.ly/active listening, there's some other anchor charts that you might use. Now, just a word on anchor charts. I refer to these as the second teacher in the classroom. These are best co-constructed with students, not kind of printed off this website and stuck up on your wall. So it's because it's the discussion behind the anchor chart that is actually the most important thing. Okay, we are going to have a look at a video now, a school in the UK, School 21. I want you to think about, when you're watching this video, I think it's a really terrific video, what are some of the scaffolds and supports or supporting structures that you notice that the teachers have put in place for the students to help them to develop their oral language skills? And there are plenty. So have a think about when you're watching this, identifying those supports and structures, and then we're going to have a reflection on this. It goes for about 6 minutes.
Put your hand up if someone in your family comes from somewhere else in the world and has come to live in London. Could you turn to the person next to you and have a discussion about this talking point?
I think Stratford is a better place to live because they're not against anyone and it's...
Well, can I just clarify you? What do you mean by, against?
Literacy is the keystone to everything that happens in the curriculum. There are such high expectations for talk, and it does really make a difference in the children how articulate and how confident they are.
The vision of School 21 is to prepare young people for the world that they're going to go into in the 21st century. I think one of the biggest barriers to the students we serve really getting on in life is lack of good communication skills. We need to elevate speaking to the same level as reading and writing.
So we have a vote.
What makes me enjoy talking the most is that everybody's listening to you and you're like part of the world and you feel respected and important.
When I'm talking, they're listening what I'm saying, and sometimes they give me questions, or maybe I give them questions.
Every child within this school is expected to speak in every lesson, in every opportunity throughout their school day, and we try and create lots of different contexts for young people to hone their skills as speakers.
Right, so what I want us to do now is to have a discussion about different kinds of culture, and I want us to discuss this. Some cultures are better than others.
I think every teacher, if you say to them, do you talk in your classroom? Of course there's talking in the classroom, but what's different here is the deliberateness of it.
Every teacher needs to have that toolkit of things that they can draw on to bring effective talk into their practice.
We've done a lot of work introducing sentence stems that children can use for different situations, so for agreeing with somebody, for disagreeing politely with someone, for challenging someone.
And while we're doing that, I want you to make sure that you're using some of the sentence stems. So you might say linking to someone's point or build on something that somebody has said.
Building on I agree because maybe...
The thing that's had the biggest impact on my practice is probably discussion guidelines.
We are going to be discussing why beliefs were important or why they weren't important in ancient Greece. Could anybody remind me about any of our discussion guidelines?
One of them is when someone's not contributing, you have to invite them by asking them a question or saying their name.
Excellent. Why would you do that, Aaron?
Then everyone has an idea.
Everyone gets to share their idea, don't they? Well done.
So discussion guidelines were created in conjunction with the children. These are the 5 or 6 key things that we think make a really good discussion. I've been able to take a step back, and I think that the children take on a larger role within the classroom.
I think it should be Aries and Athena because they're both the god of war.
Yeah, but to challenge your diva, there are lots of fishermen.
So another key way of promoting oracy in the classroom is to think carefully about the groupings that you use. So whether you're getting them to talk in pairs or in trios or in larger groups.
Sometimes it's best to have students in threes. Sometimes we look at how they can stand in the traverse opposite each other. Each of those different groupings enables a different type of conversation.
If you see inside them, we're all human beings and we're all people.
Our oracy programme is comprehensive. It has to be seen in maths and science and those subjects that traditionally haven't had a talk focus.
There are 24 cookies altogether.
There are 24 cookies altogether.
There are 3 children.
There are 3 children.
All right, let's see if I would say that I'd always encouraged talk in my maths lessons before, but what's changed is that I really plan very carefully for talk, and I model and structure the talk very explicitly.
Okay, so we're going to go and do our talk task.
A talk task, they get to practice what they've done in the new learning, and they're talking through what they're doing. So it's about developing their vocabulary and language of explanation.
We were talking about fractions. We done like 4 circles. And then we needed to share 24 in each group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Your turn. We were using sentences to help us. 24 shared equally between 4 children is equal to 6. Let's do another.
There are lots of different reasons why we get students who may not feel it's almost their place to speak. So for all those reasons, oracy is an issue of equality, of equity, of social mobility.
Wow, I heard some pretty amazing discussions going on just now. So let's get some feedback from some groups.
Because of the focus on oracy, we've seen our students become much more confident in their ideas. By creating the context and the opportunities for them to speak, they've just flown and become eloquent, engaging speakers.
Hayden?
We came to a decision and said that we disagree with the text. Everyone is unique. Everyone's the same, but they do their things in different ways.
Okay, who's interested in coming on a study tour? I'm sure Basto can organise that for us. Just send the emails in, everyone. I would love to go and visit that school. You can see the work that they've done on oral language and how articulate those students are, because they've really prioritised their oral language, or as the principal, I think it was, said, as they've raised the importance of it to as important as reading and writing. And you can see the benefits in that video there. So I would like you in the chat to share what are some of the scaffolds or supporting structures that you noticed in that video. And I haven't put I've got one volunteer to come on the study tour already, which is great. I haven't put a timer on this slide, but I'll give you about 2 minutes just to reflect on what were some of the scaffolds that those students didn't get to be that articulate just through osmosis. The teachers really carefully scaffolded the work. So in the chat, I would like you to share some of the scaffolds and the supports that you noticed in that video, and I'll give you about a minute or 2 to do that. I've got a few for the study tour. Great. Thanks for that.
You know, we can get a serious phone call tomorrow. I do, I'd vote for that too.
Yeah. We should have a literacy study tour.
We're doing the symposium in Paris.
Let's do it, Teresa. You and I aren't afraid of study tour together. Oh, Deb, Did you send me the Padlet address? Oh, no, it's all right. I realised what's happened. My Gmail doesn't work in this building. Okay, thank you for that. As people have pointed out, there's partner talk, there's small group talk, the co-constructed anchor charts, the sentence stems. So we're going to have a look at a couple of those now. The teacher said that the thing that changed her practice was were the discussion guidelines. So I've got an image there, their discussion guidelines, and I've put the text of their discussion guidelines on the left there. So always respect each other's ideas, be prepared to change your mind. How important is that? And all of these skills that we're teaching our students are skills that they'll go out and use in the world because we've explicitly scaffolded the students to build these skills. They're all things that we need everyone in society to be able to do. Come to a shared agreement, clarify, challenge, summarise and build on each other's ideas, invite someone to contribute by asking a question. That's a really important skill as well. So not only does it help you to realise if you're dominating the conversation, but you're scooping other people into the conversation if you realise that they're not contributing, and show proof of listening. Oh, I love that wording. You can see their anchor chart hasn't been printed off Pinterest. They've co-constructed that. It's messy. It has, it's not absolutely perfect. It's not laminated. They've constructed that and had that rich discussion underneath the anchor chart. So I've put that on there so you can use that yourselves. Our own beautiful literacy teaching toolkit has some sample ground rules as well for this type of talk. So these are the sample ground rules from our literacy teaching toolkit. We'll look at the speaker to show we are listening. We'll use our facial expression and body language to show we are listening. Obviously, you'd have to unpack that. What would you be doing what type of body language shows that you're listening, that type of thing. We'll contribute at least one idea to the group discussion. We will each ask one question during the group discussion. Of course, they'll be forced at the start until the students get the hang of this. We'll build upon what the group members say. We will ask clarifying questions if we are confused. We will thank each other for talk contributions, and we'll use polite ways to challenge speakers with whom we don't agree. How useful is that skill? Out in the yard, we have a disagreement. We tell our students to talk it out. Have we stepped them through all of the skills and all of the oral language necessary to be able to talk it out? That's what we're talking about here. In that School 21, they use these 6 types of talk. So they've got the instigator, the builder, the challenger, the clarifier, the prober, and the summariser. Now, think of literacy circles and sort of how they started, Harvey and Gubba started with the roles. They were always supposed to be a scaffold that was eventually pulled away, not to teach the students how to roll, but to teach them how to have a deep book discussion. This is the same thing. We're not teaching the students how to roll, how to do each of these roles. Our ultimate aim is for them to engage in a deep and rich discussion using each of these types of talk when it is necessary, when the flow allows it. So School 21, they start by working with clarifier, challenger and summariser. You would just focus on the one, have heaps of practice and build the skills of the students in that one and then move on to the next one. So and then they also in that school, they learn the roles and then they watch videos of group discussion. So they actually have a discussion, and this is that talk about talk. They have a discussion, they talk about the role, then they watch the video of the discussion that they've just engaged in to say, well, which one of the roles were the people taking on, who instigated the conversation, who built onto that person, that type of thing. So that idea of filming it and then watching themselves back so they can learn, which would be a great lesson for us to do as teachers as well. Another resource, this was shared by Beverly Derewinker in the second masterclass, and I wanted to bring it back again because it is relevant here. I've put a link at the top there, bit.ly/convo starters, and one of my really quick Padlet friends will be able to put that in the Padlet for you so you can go straight there. These are the conversation starters and that Beverly shared, and you could use these for the students as well by, I wouldn't hand them all out and just without the scaffolding. I would work through each of them and get the students to have a practice using them, reflect on it before I brought out the next one. So I would, you might start with that restating and repeating before you move through maybe to agreeing and disagreeing at the end there. So that's another resource that you'll be able to use after this. Anchor charts. Someone listed anchor charts as being important in one of the scaffolds that School 21 used. So I've just got a couple of examples of anchor charts. The one on the left is a little bit text heavy, and I'm not sure how often they'll use it. The important thing about anchor charts is if you as a teacher aren't constantly referring to these charts, then your students are not going to use the charts and they will turn into wallpaper. So you need yourself to be, maybe when you're doing a mini lesson, maybe when you're introducing the topic, you need to be referring back to that anchor chart on your wall. Remember when we had that discussion around what's the elements of accountable talk? Remember when we talked about the talk stems over here on our anchor chart? So you've got to be training the students to use the supports that you've put around the room. Otherwise, the students will not use them and then it will become a pointless activity. A couple more examples of anchor charts. So the one on the left is a bit clearer with just some example sentence stems. I included the one on the right because I want you to remember that this talk isn't just for the literacy classroom. This is for the classroom, any content area classroom. And you saw in that video, they talked about their maths sentence stems that they were using. So just to remind, this is deepening our comprehension of whatever content it is that our students are engaging in. That's why I've included that, the math talk sentence starter on the right. Now, if anchor charts are new to you, this is the book that you need to be looking at. It's a book called Smarter Charts. It does say K-2, but I think it's totally legal to use it above Year 2. And in here, they talk about kind of the art and science of anchor chart creation. So they actually go into this, they literally go into the science around the idea of adding text and images and how if you add images to your text, I think of it as it kind of weighs it down. So if you've just got text, it's a bit light. If you've just got images, it's a bit light. If you join them together, they become heavier and then they sink down and it becomes a memory in your mind. So this has some really fantastic examples of anchor charts and gives you an idea about how even us terrible drawers can actually achieve some really effective anchor charts in our classrooms. So I just thought I'd put that up there. Okay, we are going to have a look at another video now. This is talk moves in an EAL classroom. And again, I want you to think about what are some of the scaffolds and support. This is a secondary classroom. Thinking about how as a teacher use that gradual release of responsibility to build the capacity of the students to engage in that rich discussion.
When you're having a conversation, you're going to share your answers. You're not only going to share your answers, you're going to respond to what other people say. We've looked at talk moves quite a few times and clarifying questions. It's about learning how to participate in an academic discussion, learning how to listen to what other people are saying and respond appropriately. What's the first talk move?
I agree with what Leung said because...
So you can agree. Say, oh, I said the same thing as Diana. I agree with what Diana said because that was crazy when that happened. Gia Lynn, how about the second one?
I want to add on to what Frank say. I think that...
I would love to hear you adding on to people's ideas. I'll read a couple more. You can disagree with someone. You can make a connection to what someone said. You can ask someone to explain their thinking. Or you can even say, can you repeat that? I couldn't understand you. I feel like they give them a good starting point. So for the students who aren't sure of what they want to say or how they want to get their ideas out, they at least have a point and some choices that can lead them into what they want to say.
The most thing I'm interested and beautiful is the dude talked and walked when he is a baby, because I never see a baby talk and walk like this.
I got the same answer.
Okay, so what about if you look up here at the talk moves, what can you say that again?
I have a connection to what she said. Diana.
Better. My role is to be explicit in what I'm asking them to do, and also modeling ways to improve the discussion. I like that everyone's sharing their ideas, but make sure, like how Michael responded to someone else, I want to hear talk moves too, okay? Part of it's having the confidence that it's okay if they mess up, having the starters up there so they have something to kind of lean on and a crutch.
I agree with what David say, because he wants to have a better life than he being spoiled.
I want them to get to a point where their conversation is more authentic and where they're engaging with each other at higher levels. Perfect.
As I said the word diarrhea in a professional learning session, that I've now got a bug in the system, so I won't do that again. Note to self. All right, so what were some of the scaffolds or support structures that you noticed in the video? I'd love you to add those to the chat. I see Jodie's added sentence starters. One of the things that I really like about that video is that the teacher, the male student, responded, but he only responded with a couple of words, and she forced him to go back to you to answer in a full sentence using the sentence stems. So I thought that was important. Jodie said that it's okay to mess up. I did actually think it could have been your fault, Jodie, that I had a stutter in the video because you'd done it in the chat earlier. Okay, so I'm going to move on. Here's the resource that you can use that comes from that video, Talk Moves. So bit.ly/talkmoves1. This is a resource that you can use again for yourself so that you can improve the quality of the discussion that you are directing, and also as sentence stems for your students. So you can see this is the talk move that they're talking about: revoicing, saying more, rephrasing, asking for evidence, adding on. And again, you would introduce these one at a time. We're not going to slam them all on the students all in one go. So there are a couple more, but my screen wasn't big enough. Apologies. So that is bit.ly/talkmoves1 to access that resource there. Okay, so when we're going through introducing these kind of talk moves to our students, then we're going to get to this one, which is about respectfully disagreeing with an idea. This is so important for our students to learn how to do this. And it's something that we just assume that they know how to do. And if you think about some of the backgrounds that our students are coming with, we can't rely on the models in our students' lives to be teaching them these respectful ways of disagreeing with an idea. And indeed, some world leaders could do with this course at the moment. So what I've got here is this is following a classroom discussion about what do you think some of the ways are that we could respectfully disagree with someone. And so they've co-constructed an anchor chart here, and students have just all contributed their ideas to the chart. You can see the obvious crossover benefits of this type of thing with student writing. So if we can do it in our language, we've got the skills and the sentence stems when we're talking and disagreeing. We're going to be much more proficient at it when it comes to writing and disagreeing. So another way of getting student responses, if you're a bit more high-tech, you might use something like answergarden.com. So answergarden.com is a free website. You can see there, as a teacher, I haven't had to sign in or anything. I just press create new answer garden. I've posed a question: how can someone disagree respectfully? And then I share the link that is produced, and then the students contribute their result or their responses. And just like word clouds, the responses that are put in are repeated become larger and larger. So you can see here with this answer garden, more than one person has written "I disagree" as an example of what they think of how you might disagree with someone respectfully. So that's just another way of collating, of getting students to contribute their ideas. You could print that off if you want, or you can store it on your class LMS, whatever it is. Okay, so that's the higher tech version. Fiona missed the last link. Someone's put it in there for her. So again, on the School 21, they talked about the different ways that we can get our students to talk. This is my really, you can see why I wasn't a graphic designer. I'm definitely not going to go into that field. Top left, this is where I call it the seats on the bus. So when you have students standing in two lines and they're talking to the person opposite them. So you might put a prompt on the board for them to discuss. So say if we're doing something about disagreeing, so you might put a controversial statement on the board, and then you'll have the students talk just to the person opposite them. So you give them that chance, and then after a certain amount of time, say a minute of discussion, then one side of the bus takes one step up, and then you've got a new partner, so you can practice again. Over on the right-hand side, that is my terrible illustration of turn and talk to your partner, elbow talk. It's really bad, I know. The bottom left is so you have an inside circle and then an outside circle, a donut, and then you just get everyone to move one space. And then the last one is just that idea that you can have students talking in pairs or threes or fours or maybe even more. A word of caution about that, again, we have to scaffold this. So if we're teaching our students how to disagree respectfully, we are not wanting to put them into a group of 6 kids and putting a controversial statement up there. We want them to practice that in a small one-on-one first. And then we might move to that two people and a group of 4. And then we might move to a larger group. So we've got to really set our students up for success. And particularly that disagreeing one is really important to practice. Once they've had a go at the statement, then you'll ask them, how did you go with that discussion? And this is a sample anchor chart that you can use for that. It's a talk time rubric. So you would come up with this with your class to say what are the elements of an effective discussion. So this is just on this one, we spoke without raising our hands. Now this is important because in the real world, outside of the captivity of school, we don't actually put our hand up to speak next. So we need to teach our students, how do you have a conversation without having to put up your hand to indicate that you want to speak next. And that's some of the social skills and the pragmatics that our students learn when we're scaffolding their speaking and listening in class. So in this one, they've said many voices were heard and given themselves a score out of 4. We looked at the speaker and watched the conversation. We stayed on topic and we responded to each other's ideas. You might have different examples in there, but it's really critical that we do, after we've engaged in the discussion, we give the students the time to then reflect on the discussion and reflect on their capacity as speakers and listeners in the discussion. So the talk is the work. And again, goes back to that idea about more talk about talk. So dialogic talk, as you can hopefully see now, it's talk with substance. So we go back to that comment that says it's not just about having students talk more, it's talk with substance. It positions students as thinkers, investigators, active contributors, activist participants, co-creators, knowers, learners, and community members. And that's really what we're trying to build with this dialogic talk in our classrooms. Okay, so I think someone said, how do you end conversations? I would use a bell in my class to get attention back to and to then start the discussion around the feedback and self-evaluation. Just a point on that, you need to state your signal, your ending signal, before they engage in the conversation. Otherwise, it'd be really hard to get them back. So again, that's kind of a bit of training as well. Okay, time for some self-reflection now. So thinking about the square, the triangle, and the circle, what do you agree with? What's the most important thing you've learned? And what questions do you still have in regards to student talk? Also in here, I would love you to share something that you've trialed or used in your classroom in regards to improving the amount and the quality of the student talk. Now, one of the students in my LDAP class, Travis from Maiden Gully, they used to implement a No Pens Wednesday, which is where they had, it's pretty self-explanatory, I think. On Wednesdays, they had no class activities that involved writing. It was all speaking and listening, and it really forced their teachers into thinking about how can we engage in rich discussion in our classes. So there's a suggestion. That's just one of the ones. If you've got any other suggestions about things that you've done, I'd love you to share those in the chat, and I'll give you 3 minutes to reflect on what we've been discussing with Student Talk. Okay, thank you everyone. Thanks for sharing your questions and your thoughts in there. It's really good feedback for me to see what you're thinking about and some ideas potentially for future masterclass sessions. Charlotte's asked a question about, it's important to me, but I noticed on anchor charts in the classroom, one of the guidelines was come to a shared agreement. I think it's important, it depends on what the purpose of the activity is. So if you're working on disagreeing respectfully, then I would make that a really short and sharp activity so you don't run out of, someone else had said about running out of things to say. For that, I'd keep that short and sharp, and the focus of it is that they are specifically either agreeing or disagreeing. They might actually both agree, and that's fine. So for that, I think it's important that you know what is the purpose of the questions that you're putting out there. It depends on what your question is that you're putting out, because some of them might be directed at saying, as a group, you have to come up with an answer, one answer for the group. And that's different to saying you either have to disagree or agree to this individually. So I think it just depends on what your purpose is for that one. Okay. Right, let's turn our attention now. We've had a big discussion around talk, and I think we can start to see the real importance of talk and start to reflect on some of our classroom discussions, particularly maybe our literacy blocks, to see, are our students, who's doing the work? So there's a great quote. I do not know where it came from, but it says the person doing the work is doing the learning. So if you are dominating the classroom discussion or dominating the classroom or the airtime, you're the one doing the learning. So really thinking about what's happening in your classes, who's doing the learning in your classroom, and do you need to start giving over some of that learning to the students and making them more accountable and more active in the classroom and in the with the content that you're providing them. So we're going to turn our attention now to vocabulary. And I do apologise because we don't have a whole lot of time for it, but what I wanted to do was just to highlight the importance of it, give you a few resources so that you can go away and start to investigate some further for yourselves. And once you do realise the importance of it, just like talk, and I think, you know, we do underestimate the importance of it, you'll really start to lift the quality of it in your classroom. So we haven't seen a video of John Hattie tonight, and I'm going to pull it out for you now just to make sure that it's an official masterclass now that we have a John Hattie video. This video is straight from the Literacy Teaching Toolkit, talking about the power of vocabulary. Let's have a look.
Vocabulary instruction is pretty key no matter what age the kid is at. And certainly in the very early years, if I had a simple prescription for literacy, it's simple. Language, 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 talk, 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 listen, listen, listen. And one of the troubles is that so often many kids don't hear a lot of language before they come to school.
Predictors of good reading ability is vocabulary knowledge, and vocabulary is different in text from its ordinary existence in life. A large part of schooling involves understanding what linguists would call the register of schooling, the specific use of language in school. And in school, language tends to be more precise and predictable and technical than it is outside. But in school we have to try to be more precise because we're doing more writing. So writing imposes more order on language, and we have to talk about this so that people understand these requirements of teaching. So this is what I mean by register. The technical language of schooling is actually different from ordinary speech, and a large part of what schooling does is induct children into a more technical register.
The other thing we find is that certainly about the age of 7, 8, where kids start to get the fundamentals of reading, then so often that's where vocabulary instruction becomes imperative. There is an argument that there is a slump at about the 8 or 9 year level. We can't find evidence for a slump, but we certainly find evidence for a slowing down, and most of that slowing down relates to teachers assuming that children have the vocabulary for the lesson as they go through upper primary school, where we're teaching them various subjects like the science and social studies and those subjects, mathematics. They don't have the vocabulary. And so specifically teaching vocabulary becomes very critical in upper primary school. But right throughout, it is one of the most important things that we can do. We should never assume that kids have that vocabulary. One is when you're first exposed to new words, new vocabulary, new texts, new tasks that require literacy, then having that instruction, getting a sense of a summary, a bit of an organisation, get that higher picture about what you actually focus on. Because you just imagine a child coming up with a text, hundreds of thousands of words. What's the priorities here? And building that skill, where to start.
Okay, so thanks to John Hattie and co. So let's have a look at this. I know this is a lot of text. I know I'm guilty of that tonight, but this, I couldn't go past putting this in here because I use this all the time because I think it's so critical that everyone knows this. This is a study, so Why Teach Vocabulary? A study by Hart and Risley in 1995, also 2003, published a study of the vocabularies of 1 to 3-year-old children of professional, working class and welfare families. Their results showed that by the time they were 3, the children from the welfare families had heard 30 million fewer words than had those from the professional families. As a result of this lack of exposure, the children from welfare families knew less than half as many words as those from professional families. Results further showed that these differences persisted into kindergarten and beyond, that into 3rd grade, the last year in which the children were tested. 30 million words difference. That is absolutely mind-blowing. It is absolutely critical, particularly for us government school teachers, because we have the largest majority of students from those from the welfare families are in our government schools. So this is why vocab instruction is absolutely critical for our students. Vocabulary knowledge is content knowledge. Now, this is particularly relevant for secondary teachers who might not want to put the time aside because they've got so much content to teach, and I understand that. This vocabulary knowledge is content knowledge. Research reveals that vocab knowledge is the single best indicator of students' reading ability, comprehension, and familiarity with academic discourse. And because of this, vocab knowledge is one of the best predictors of student success in school. So when we talk about that academic discourse, if our students don't have access to that academic discourse, then they are less likely to experience success in school, because that is the discourse of schooling. It is also the discourse of professional life. So that is why it is imperative for us to crack open this vocabulary with our students. For EAL learners, if new words are not consistently taught and learned in all subject areas, then the problems that our EAL learners face are compounded, and their ongoing underachievement becomes more likely. So if we don't engage in that really explicit and robust instruction, our EAL learners will be stuck with learning the tier 1 words. They won't have access to the academic vocabulary that is necessary for success in our schooling system. Where do you go on our literacy teaching toolkit for resources to do with vocabulary? You go in reading and viewing, because the links to vocabulary are so strong between reading and viewing. Then you'll go into literacy focus, and then hidden under there, vocabulary. Also on the literacy teaching toolkit, if you scroll down on the first page, you can get to a map, and it will give you a PDF with hyperlinks in there, and I think it's a lot easier to find things using that map. So that's another way to find the vocabulary resources. So this has links to to research. It also has links to some lesson plans, I think. Someone correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so let's have a little taste of some of the learning. If you were engaged in leading literacy for networks or leading literacy at Basto, or the literacy data assessment practice course at Basto, then we do a really deep dive into this vocab instruction. But tonight we're on a short timeline, so I'm just going to give you a little taster of some of the things that are necessary to know about. So firstly, which words do we teach? We can't teach all of the words because we just don't have the time to do that. So words are categorized into 3 categories, and this comes from the work of Beck and McCown, and there's a book called Robust Vocabulary Instruction. Google that. And they talk about the 3 tiers of words. So the first tier, these are the basic words. So these are words that we hear in spoken language generally. I always have a little joke to say these are the words you're going to hear on Home and Away and Neighbours. Okay? So if you're having trouble thinking about what are the tier 1 words, so I've got some examples there. Run, see, book, school. They're not all nouns, but tier 1 is just that kind of that spoken language, the spoken language words. Tier 2, we're moving more into academia here. So these are words that we find mainly in printed text, and they're words kind of stumbled, formulate, contrast. These are the words that our students need access to lift the quality of their writing. So if you've got, NAPLAN over the top of you saying you need to improve your writing, vocabulary absolutely can boost the quality of students' writing, and it can also boost the quality of the student reading. And then the final tier is tier 3. These are more the technical words. So these are kind of domain specific. I've got on there epidermis, molecule. I think I've got referred to spelling it right. So these are the words that are more technical. So which one of these words are we teaching to our students? We're leaving tier 1 because they can engage in those words out in society. We might have to do some tier 1 instruction for our EAL students, but we're really zooming in on tier 2 and some of those tier 3 words as well. And if you think about, say, the math testing, for example, sometimes it's actually the literacy in the question that is preventing our students from answering those questions. It's not actually the maths. So it's some of those, the questioning in our testing can be tier 2 and tier 3 words that our students just haven't been able to be exposed to up until now. So when we're looking at which words to teach, we're looking at kind of tier 2 and tier 3. Now, my suggestion to you is grab a picture storybook. They are usually sprinkled with brilliant tier 2 words. So I'm not kind of like the funny ones from Big W Isles, but like your really good quality authors like Mem Fox and things like that. So usually in there you'll find words like stumbled and sprinkled and all of those words. Some people refer to them as expensive words, and the tier 1s are kind of cheap words because they're everywhere. The tier 2 are a bit more, and students seem to get their mind around that, which words are expensive and which words are cheap. The only caution that I have about the whole idea of introducing your students to these 3 tiers, sometimes students equate the length of the word with whether it's in tier 2 or tier 3. So the length of the word has no importance. It is whether we're seeing them in written text or spoken text. So we're just got to do a bit of instruction about that, because our students can think that long words are expensive words. Well, not necessarily the case. So think about when you're looking to use words to teach your students, you'll pull these from the class novel, you'll pull these from the textbook. So if you've got a science textbook, what are the words that your students are really going to need to know to deepen their understanding of the text? You might use any picture story books that you're reading. So you'll actually plan for these to instruct with these words in advance. It's not necessarily look at this book and this word in this book. Let's now go and do a big discussion on this. So when you're planning your unit of work, this is a picture storybook that we're going to be reading, and here are the words. So then you'll need to fill out a planner to say, okay, how are we going to use these words with the students? How many words do you teach? This is trial and error. There's a range in the research is kind of between 5 to 12 words. With my own experience, I would recommend no more than 5 a week, and for the junior classes, even less than that, maybe 2 to 3. Absolutely, you can work that out with your own students. And if you think about, 5 words a week, that's not a lot. That's only 50 a term. There's hundreds and millions of words. When you're teaching those 5 words, you're actually unlocking a whole bunch of other words. So you're not just only teaching 5 words a week. You'll be looking at the antonyms, you'll be looking at the synonyms, you'll be looking at the root. So like I did with diagram, unlocked the meaning of a few other words as well. Some words need multiple exposures. Some words, you might be reading the class novel and come across a word and pull yourself up and go, does anyone know what that word means? So some words need up to 10 to 12 exposures for the students to be able to feel comfortable to use them in their own writing and in their own speech. So what's the book we need to buy for this one, you're asking? Everyone's always asking me that question. Word Nerds is a really great resource for this. And in here they have suggested practical activities that you can engage with to teach your students the different words. They have, this is an adapted vocabulary cycle, and we talk about this in Leading Literacy. You'd plan which words you're going to teach. You will administer a pre-assessment of the words, a VKS, introduce the words, look at the synonyms and then the antonyms. You create an anchor chart. Your whole room's going to be full of these anchor charts. You'll explore morphology and etymology, so the word parts and the history, and then engage in some practice, because we need to get messy with the words in order to sink those words into our mind. Then you'll assess the understanding to see what was the impact of that. Have the students understood the words? Do they now know the meaning of those words? What other words do they know as a result of those words? So this is you can get this, an adapted version of this in that book, Word Nerds. Sample planner, just very quickly, top row there, you've got the words. So you've been through your picture storybook, you've pulled out some words that you're going to instruct. Trudge, you have to come up with a kid-friendly definition. Now that is actually really hard work. That's the definition needs to explain what the word means without using the word and without using more technical vocab again. So the sentence needs to reiterate the meaning of the word. So for the word trudge, I couldn't write the boy trudged as my sentence because it doesn't explain what does trudge mean. So I've put the teenage boy trudged to the sink after his dad told him to wash the dishes. That probably needs a bit more work too. But it is quite difficult to come up with a sentence. If you have selected your words straight from a text, then you can use the sentence as it was in the text if it helps the students to remember the meaning of it. Synonyms and antonyms, you can find those easily. I use Google. I just go to Google and type in define and then the word. It'll give you the meaning, the synonyms, the antonyms, the history. A picture if you can find one, and then if there are any sayings that relate to that word, particularly for our EAL students, this is relevant, then pop those in there as well. I couldn't find any for trudge. There might be some out there. What's an example of a pre-assessment? VKS. You need to look that one up. So a vocabulary knowledge scale. So this is that we know words on different levels. So there's level 1, which is, never seen this word before, right through to, say, 3. Yeah, I've seen it. I think I know what it means. Right through to number 5 is, yep, I'm all over this word. I know how to use it in a sentence. In fact, I use it all of the time. So we're finding out what's our students' familiarity with the words that we are about to teach them before we go and teach them. Being a Google lover, I would put this on a Google form and send it out that way to collate that data really quickly and then have that there to do again as a post-test at the end of the cycle. Your cycle might be 1 week, it might be 2 weeks. So then the students will engage in interactions with words. This is where our discussion. So you turn and talk to your partner and discuss what is happening in these images, remembering to use our vocabulary word of trudge. So that's just a little example there. And the other one is a Freya model. So this is where you put the word in the middle, you have the definition, you write the word in a sentence, you add the synonyms and the antonyms, and then you might add an image as well. This is from Roxburgh Park. Thanks, ladies. I love this image of trudge here. That's exactly what I look like when I'm going to do the dishes. So you can do a whole class Freya chart, or you can do as an A3 book. So you might do that for the juniors. Here's an example of the juniors. Right through to secondary, you'd be getting the students to do individual Freya models in their own books, so they can go back and access those words that you've been working on. So this is an A3 one that sits at the classroom door, and so when the students come in the morning, they can go over the words that they've been learning in class. This is another example here. For our EAL learners, you can add slip down the bottom, a connection to word. One of the schools that is in our leading literacy group, they got their students to go home, find out what is their first language word equivalent for this word they've been working on in class, and they brought those back in on sticky notes and created a huge display in their classroom to say, here's our word of the week, and here are all of our languages that have the equivalent for this word. And by all accounts, the parent engagement has been really terrific with that. And for some students, it's the first time their first language has been acknowledged inside the school ground. So I really love that idea. The people who did it said that they learnt so much about their students and so much about the languages of their students through doing that, and have now adapted it so they do it each week. Just an idea. I'm going to skip through to morphology. This can be tricky for us because we didn't always learn about morphology in our schools, in our university. So morphology is the study of words and their parts, and I kind of looked at the morphology, a little bit of the word dialogue earlier. If you need more information on this, there's a whole lot of resources in the Literacy Teaching Toolkit for the morphology. So we're looking at prefixes, suffixes, and base words. If we teach our students the morphology, they can unlock a whole bunch of other words. So just reading from here, there's a book. You might be familiar with the program Words Their Way. They have a book, Vocabulary Their Way, and this is for middle and secondary students. Over 60% of all of the words in the English language contain Latin or Greek affixes and or roots. This is particularly relevant for our secondary friends. Over 90% of discipline-specific words contain Latin or Greek affixes and or roots. So if we actually engage in explicit instruction of those prefixes and suffixes and roots that are relevant to that content area, we can open up a whole lot of knowledge for our students. etymology, the history of the word, you can go onto Google to look for that, or this ETYM online. It's just as easy to do it on Google. Some words have really interesting history, like the dialogue word. Some don't have any that are written on there at all, and that's okay. It's a bit of potluck. But if you can find some good words that have a good story that you can crack open, it can really help to cement the meaning of that in your students' minds. And then finally, you would, at the end of the cycle, you'd get the students to redo the VKS, the Vocabulary Knowledge Scale, so you can work out what is their knowledge of this word and the other words that are associated with it now. You might, to do the assessment of this, you might think about, have they transferred their knowledge? Are you starting to see more tier 2 words in their writing? I don't necessarily want to see the words of the week in their writing. I don't want to force them to include these words, but I do want them to start paying attention to words when they're reading and be surprised by words and amazed by words. And instead of steamrolling over the top of words they don't know the meaning of, pulling themselves up and saying, oh, don't know that one. What does that mean? So start to listen to students' conversations. Are you starting to hear those tier 2 and 3 words in their conversations? And then you might engage in some student self-assessments. Okay, well, that was a whirlwind tour of vocabulary. Just a little taste plate though. Hopefully I've whet your appetite and you're going to go and buy some books. So we're going to have a 3-minute reflection now before I just finish off with the resources. So thinking about what questions do you still have about vocabulary and any resources that you have used. I'd love you to share those in the chat. And then we're just going to share the resources and then we'll finish up for the night. Okay, I'll give you, the timer's on. First thing. Okay, I've just given you 2 teacher minutes, which is actually 1 minute in the real world. I think you're all guilty of using that, so it's perfectly fine for me to use it as well. I just want to quickly get to the resources before you log off. For Accountable Talk, Dialogic Talk, Substantive Talk, these are the books that you need to be looking at. Talking the Talk, Snapshots from Australian Classrooms, that's from the Primary English Teachers Association of Australia, PETA. Classroom Talk, that's also from PETA. And then the third one, which is probably the more practical one, Academic Conversations. So I think the PowerPoint will be sent out after this so you can access these books there. And for the vocabulary resources, Word Nerds, oh, there it is, Bringing Words to Life. I couldn't think of the name of it. And the Vocabulary Their Way book, which is, I think they've rebadged as Words Their Way vocabulary for middle and secondary students. So they're the 3 books that, that's just the tip of the iceberg for the vocab books. There are plenty more out there. So if you want to know any more, just send me an email and I can send you another list. Our success criteria, hopefully you can now describe what the research says about oral language and vocab instruction, explain the key elements or the practical elements of the what and the how in the classroom. You've done a little bit of reflecting on your own classroom in terms of oral language and vocabulary instruction, and I'm hoping that you have a whole list of resources that you can now go to for further information on these topics. And now, to bring us to the close, time for you to reflect on the way home, probably. Activity 3, as a result of our discussions tonight, what do you think you might need to stop doing, stay doing, and start doing to ensure that the classroom discussion is achieving that 0.82 effect size that John Hattie pointed to in his research? I would love to hear some of your stop, start, and stay responses. It's good feedback for me, so I know what to include more of and less of. But I think we're going to call it a night. So thank you very much for joining us in the Literacy Masterclass series. It has been a pleasure, and hopefully we can do it again sometime. Good night, everyone.